So we are excited this morning. We're excited to share with you at least the outlines of ministry plans. 14 years ago, actually 15 years ago, when my family and I first set foot in this congregation, there was, "We need to do vision. Will you lead us?" And I said, "You need to give me a year. I need to have some understanding of what this congregation is." And so 14 years ago, we walked through a vision process. And we took what we had and we expanded on it. And we started working with 6 habits. And we started working with an expanded vision. Today, we're not trying to redo vision. The idea of radiating Christ's love. Emmanuel, God with us, empowering fully devoted disciples to radiate Christ's love to our neighbors. It's a great foundation. But today we want to talk about next steps. I mean, you don't get to look at it. I get to look back and see beautiful green out the back. I never was able to see that before. We know that there are things going on here where we're building. There's much energy and effort been put into a building project. But also, since about November, there's been much energy and effort put into discerning God's vision for Emmanuel and a ministry plan. So we say, well, if we're putting so much energy into building, why is now the time to talk about a ministry plan? Shouldn't we just kind of take a breath? And I want to say absolutely not. This is the key time for a ministry plan, because this is the time when our identity is setting. It's kind of like pouring the concrete. And now's the time to shape it, because things are going to set. It's going to be harder to change identities. Now is the time, and again, not to change the foundation of who we are, but to build on it. Because what we don't want to be is the exact same church with a bigger social hall and handicap accessible bathrooms. We want to grow with who God has called us to be. So we began drawing ideas from the congregation and sharing those at the congregational meeting. We asked Peter Kelder, our regional home missionary, to come and to lead us in a retreat with council and ministry partners, and bringing Jenna along there as well. And what I want to share with you today to begin with is the text that Peter Kelder shared with us from Luke chapter 6. And it's interesting. It begins with one of those days. So Jesus was beginning his ministry. He was starting to gather crowds. He had a large group of disciples. At some point in time, they talk about 120. We don't know if it was quite that big yet, but that's a large group of disciples. One of those days, Jesus went out on a mountainside to pray. And he spent the night in prayer. When morning came, he called the disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon, who they called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Then he went down with them to a level place. A large crowd of the disciples was there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Those who were troubled with evil spirits were cured. And the people were all trying to touch him, because power was coming out from him and healing them all. Brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, to us, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. From that passage, we see 3 directions of the relationship that Jesus shows us. Jesus seeks first the will of God. His attention is drawn up. The up part of the triangle is about our relationship with God, who we are in our relationship with God. Then there's the in part of the triangle, Who are we with each other? As a congregation, in our fellowship, in our relationships with one another, who are we to be? And then there's that out direction. Who are we in the broader world? In the community, who are we as a community of Christians, a church, in the world around us? Because we're not supposed to be a bomb shelter trying to huddle in and hide from all the difficult things out in the world. That's not who God calls us to be. We are called to be more like a lifeguard station, ready to go out into the troubled waters and to gather people in to the salvation that is in Jesus Christ. And we look at this in and out and up as a triangle. These three things need to work together. They are the building blocks on which we build our faith, our ministry. This passage has all three. They were all three up. The relationship with God, in the relationship of the believing community, and out, the relationship with the community, the world around. They were all part of the foundation of Jesus' ministry. And we have them as part of a foundation of our ministry as well. Our vision. Emmanuel, God with us. That's up. We do nothing on our own. Emmanuel, God with us, empowering. God is empowering us. Gifts of the Spirit, fruit of the Spirit, the way we understand the sacraments, God is empowering us. Fully devoted disciples. Who are we with one another? What does it mean to love, to care for each other? To be first filled with Christ's love and let that love overflow within the relationships of family and congregation. And then to radiate Christ's love to our neighbors. Our neighbors. Thinking of the parable of the Good Samaritan, and the neighbor is the one in need who you come across and you can meet that need. This is radiating Christ's love as Jesus did. Living this out, we were led in our last vision process to take that vision and to sketch it out and then to talk about 6 habits, 6 things that Christians regularly do that are part of who we are. And this is the foundation. We're not changing the foundation. We have up habits of worship, right? Worshiping God. Who are we in the presence of God? We worship Him. Prayer. Who are we in the presence of God? We bring our praise to Him in prayer. We ask for the things that we need. We ask for the forgiveness of our sins. We confess who we are. We offer our praises to God in prayer. And even giving is a part of who we are with God, responding to what He has given to us first. We have up habits. We have in habits. The habit of community, fellowship, and fun, and caring with one another. The habit of discipleship, learning and growing to do God's will together. And we have out habits. Intentionally, the habit of service. That we reach out in Christian love. But more than that, really all of these habits are out habits. Making disciples is an out habit. Welcoming people into the community is an out habit. Giving for ministry is an out habit. Praying for our neighbors is an out habit. Inviting people to come and to experience worship is an out habit. And so while we are, hey, that worked out really well. I even knocked the battery out of it. Let's see if we can manage to make that work. Otherwise, Jackie's going to have a lot more work today. We have these habits. We've been living out this identity for 13 or 14 years. And the truth is, as a congregation, Emmanuel's been living out that identity longer with that slogan, radiate Christ's love. So, following Peter Keller's guidance at the retreat, we have fashioned a ministry plan with goals in each of these 3 directions. These 3 primary directions of relationship demonstrated by Jesus. And to make our pyramid work, we're going to start with the in habit. Jesus, after spending the night in prayer, chose 12 of His many disciples to be apostles. These are 12 individuals. They have names. Peter and John and Bartholomew and James the son of Alphaeus. There were also many others. Like I said, maybe 100 at this time that He could have chosen. And these others were real people with real names as well. why did Jesus choose 12? The truth is, there are limits to the number of close, meaningful relationships we can maintain. Social scientists suggest that that number is about 25. We have only so many connections that we can make strong connections with people. Of course, we know a lot more people. We can be acquaintances with a lot more people. But those solid relationships that we can build in ways that we live out the principles of authentic relationships that we talked about before, and we're going to quickly run through this morning, there's only so many. And the truth is, there are also limits to group dynamics. When a group gets bigger than 12, it becomes much more unwieldy, a lot harder to hear everyone appropriately, a lot harder to involve everyone in an activity or a discussion. And that's why we use small groups. It's not the only way to do fellowship. These principles of authentic fellowship, they're necessary for all of our relationships, but we can only build on them in so many. And so we have the in principles for fellowship. All of our fellowship. The goal for our in goal is to develop entry points for all to engage in fellowship, moving towards small groups. Now, that means that's a goal, but that's not the only means to this fellowship. It's a goal that we would all be developing relationships deep enough to practice these principles. And so, yeah, small groups is our goal. But that doesn't mean you can't practice them with a group of friends or in your family. But we want to practice these relationships. So let's start walking through these principles. Let's think first, well, not supposed to do that yet. Let's think first of all about the principle of truth-telling. And maybe that's the hardest principle of authentic relationships. Truth-telling is one of those core practices in building authentic relationships or community, which is what the end goal is all about. The hope is that more small groups would be started, that we'd have more places to build authentic relationships, that we would join groups because they're great places to build these relationships. Now, we're already doing well in this. We're at about 60% of our congregation in small groups, and that's great. We want to continue this growth. But we also want to reach out to all. To any who think that for whatever reason, maybe now's not the time for a small group right now. But to encourage us to build these authentic relationships because they are for you right now. And I'm telling a truth here. And now, this truth goes better with some people than others. Because we need to know people. And we need to know how to approach people.
Authentic relationships begin with discovery, meeting people and getting to know them. And this might even start with a pink peppermint. I see pink peppermints as a demonstration of God's grace. It is there for the asking. Whether a kid is good or bad during worship doesn't make any difference. That peppermint they can have if they ask. This has been a great way for me to get to know kids and their parents. It's kind of scary to walk into a new church. Will anyone talk to me? I like to break the ice with guests with a peppermint for children. Part of our goal is to increase the connections we make to enfold those who begin to visit Emmanuel by more intentionally welcoming and walking with newcomers and discovering how we can best help them get connected. And we have several ways, such as households of faith, small groups, choir, classes, and etc. For me, it starts with a pink peppermint. And I challenge you to think of what your pink peppermint could be.
The next two are caring and encouragement. I like to think of these as the fun aspects of small groups. It's the sleepover, the murder mystery dinner, the fishing event, or simply hanging out at a friend's house while your kids run wild. That last one happened to be my first piece of fellowship at Emmanuel when I came back. And it led me to meet one of my best friends that I later started leading a small group with. This year, we want to add more opportunities for us to grow in deeper relationships with each other. That might be a fishing event, a hunting event, or maybe even golfing, baking, cooking, crafting, or bonfires. All to taste and see what a small group could look like and what it could mean for you to be part of it.
Our final principle of authentic relationships is humility. And remember, we looked at humility as an invitation to step into a larger world. Humility reminds each one of us that the world is not about me, or it's not just about us. God's kingdom is a serving and an inviting kingdom, which leads from who we are together to who we are in the neighborhood and in the workplace. And humility then leads us to the out goal. As we move to that out goal, I want to go back to Jesus. A large crowd of disciples was there. Jesus went down the mountain to the plain, and people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, they all came. The crowds came to hear Jesus, and they came to be healed. And this is a picture of Jesus' reign, or Jesus' kingdom. This is what Jesus is about. Jesus is about salvation. He's about eternal life that he offers after we die, the wedding feast of the Lamb that we look forward to. But he is also about bringing his rule, his reign to bear here and now. At one point in his ministry, John the Baptist questioned Jesus. He sent his disciples, said this, when John heard in prison what Christ was doing, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the good news is preached to the poor." This was part of Jesus' reign, right here and right now. And the opportunity was there. They didn't go very far. They went down the mountain, and there were all the people waiting. And the people came from everywhere. And this speaking and healing and offering forgiveness is still part of Christ's reign. It's captured in our vision to radiate Christ's love to our neighbors. In this out goal, we want to build on what we are already doing well. The goal is to develop local and worldwide opportunities to bless young children by building relationships that radiate Christ's love.
A family with young children is a description we would use for ourselves. When we were looking for a church a couple years ago, we wanted a place where we would fit in, which also meant a place where our kids were welcomed and able to grow. Children in Worship, Sunday School, and Children's Messages were all ministries that welcomed us, and especially our children. I have also enjoyed teaching Sunday School and have learned so many things from the 4th and 5th graders. It really is a community that raises a child. The goal for next year is to upgrade our internal programming for young children. We look forward to having a church-wide family series event that connects children in worship, Sunday School, the Sunday morning service, and so much more.
Local outreach isn't really the question. The question is more, what and to whom? This year, we want to focus on young families in our community. And trust me, there are plenty. Wouldn't it be great to see our fellowship hall filled with families laughing and playing together? Maybe learning a Bible story at Vacation Bible School, or doing a craft on a Saturday with their moms. I also think it would be great to see our parking lot filled with kids playing. All these would be a hope to see new young families become part of our larger church community. It really takes a community to raise parents and their kids to know Christ.
Worldwide outreach is not a new idea at Emmanuel. And this year we are not looking to create anything new. but we're going to focus on what we already have. We have a great ministry to Michelle that reaches children, and the goal is to move our other ministries in that direction as well. Can we build a house for a young family in Far, Texas? And did you know that for only $300, a young pregnant woman in prison can keep her newborn child for a month? Can we help meet those needs? We want to focus our worldwide outreach to care for young children and their families. There's no need to create new. Let's simply focus on what we already have.
To radiate Christ's love appropriately, we must build relationships. It's fairly easy to send money, to sponsor a program, to volunteer for a day or even for a week. But life change happens through ongoing relationships. That's why Jesus commands us to make disciples and not converts. So we see VBS being about more than 5 days of fun and learning, but also about beginning relationships with children and their families that can be nurtured as children are invited back to children in worship and to Sunday school, as younger siblings are well cared for in a beautiful nursery, as families are encouraged to walk their faith together, as we gear our Lenten series next spring to the whole family, starting with children in worship and Sunday school and morning worship, and giving take-home discussion starters that it can move from group to group to group, and we can radiate Christ's love through building relationships. Now, preparing these goals and plans has required a lot of hard work, especially in the area of discernment. Seeking God's will for the future of Emmanuel, we ask, how best can we serve the purposes of his kingdom? When Jesus was seeking to discern his Father's will early in his ministry, he spent the night in prayer. Now remember, as a human being, Jesus laid aside his divine abilities. After his birth and before his death and resurrection, Jesus communed with the Father in much the same way that we do. Now, his communication wasn't limited by sin, so maybe it's an aqueduct versus a garden hose, but it's the same idea. He communicated to his Father through prayer. That's the up relationship. Who are we with God? That relationship is pursued through prayer and through worship. Who are we with God? Without this, the church is just another social agency. Our up goal is to increase engagement with Christ for individuals of all generations in corporate worship settings.
Being multi-generational is a beautiful part of being the church. With a multi-generational congregation, we are able to see the past of the church and its future in one room, serving God and learning to love him.
But not every generation has the same likes and dislikes. I may not understand all the preferences of the younger generation, but what I do know is that I want my children, grandchildren, and their friends to connect with God. Even if that is through bumper videos, which I have no idea of what they are. I don't quite get it. But one thing I have noticed is being a grandpa, we have to encourage our younger grandchildren to go the right way and to respect their thoughts, not for us to change them, but to respect their thoughts and deeds.
And I know that I have a lot to learn from the other generations too, like Grandpa's favorite songs.
This next year, we are going to make use of older worship pieces and practices from our church history, and we're going to try some new worship ideas through media. It is our prayer that all generations connect with God through both new and old forms. Even if the connection is simply to see a different generation connect with their Creator.
Increased engagement means simply that we want to connect with our Creator God. Everyone communicates in a different fashion, and this is true with our Creator. The goal is to see more of us engage with God. One of those ways is through prayer. Prayer is simply a conversation with God. Some of us prefer conversation quietly one-on-one, others with pictures and hand motions, and still yet others love a large crowd and an active voice. God wants our conversations to be personal. We want to see the fellowship hall filled with an interactive prayer time, with people having conversations with God in all types of ways. This is just one of the many ways we're dreaming about increasing our engagement with God.
And now I want to pause a minute. If you remember our series this spring, we talked about the spiritual disciplines. And when we use the word worship, we put a little asterisk by the word worship. And we put a definition below it that said, in worship, we engage ourselves with, dwell upon, and express the greatness, beauty, and goodness of God through thought and the use of words, rituals, and symbols. Dwell upon. Worship is dwelling upon God, His goodness, His greatness. That happens in Sunday morning and evening worship, yes, but there are many more places where that happens. And when we think about increasing this engagement, we think about multi-generational worship, we think about dwelling on Christ in many different settings. It could be the beginning of Sunday school with the singing. It could be at a small group or at a youth group where we dwell upon God. Where we think about, we talk about, we ponder, we wonder, we sing about God, who He is, what He does. We express the greatness of God. Now, we can do that in talking as well as we can in singing. Where we talk about the beauty of God, the goodness of God. And it's also in rituals. Rituals like the Lord's Supper, or baptism, or leaving in silence on a Good Friday, or symbols like a cross or a palm branch. Our up goal centers on these settings where we worship together. It could be the prayer group. It could be your small group. It could be the Gems Club. But where we worship together, singing, praying, hearing the word, but doing these things together. We look forward to bringing in a lot of practices. This was one where we had like 6 whiteboards filled with ideas that are going on to the worship committee. But other things too. Praying together. June 18, Bob Vanderplatz is coming. And we're going to talk about praying together around the sanctity of life. And hoping to invite community to come in and to be a part of that, praying for the sanctity of life. We're looking forward to and starting to think about the dedication of this building. And praying through this building, and what does that look like? What does God want to accomplish in this new building? So, what are we excited about? We're excited about a plan for 2017 and 18 to radiate Christ's love. We're excited about building on this vision that Emmanuel, in other words, God with us, it all begins with God. Empowering fully devoted disciples. So, who are we to be? We're to be fully devoted, following Christ with all we are. But God is seeking to empower you and use the congregation, use the church to empower you. Our building is beautiful. It's fun to think about that being used for a purpose, being used to radiate Christ's love, which has been the vision of this congregation from before I knew there was an Emmanuel Church in Sheldon, Iowa. But to use this place for the end goal. A place to sit and have coffee with a friend, a place to gather with a small group, a place to invite children to come into GEMS. The end goal. To use this place for the out goal. To use the closet for Love in the Name of Christ, and people don't have to go downstairs anymore to get to the supplies closet. To use the fellowship hall to be filled with children during VBS, or put together another outreach event that brings people in and fills it up. And to use this place for the up goal, to worship God. To worship God together here in the sanctuary. To worship God in a back room where maybe the children are singing. To worship God as the youth group meets across the road. We are excited because God is at work. Emmanuel, God with us. Empowering fully devoted disciples to radiate Christ's love and to do that to our neighbors. Our neighbors, those we come in contact with who have a need. Who have a need to hear Christ. Who have a need to get a ride. Who have a need to be helped with their finances. Let us meet that need in the strength and the power of Christ and radiate his love. Let's pray together.